Okay. I think we are live, so let me know if y'all can hear us. Do you want to say something, Bib, for volume checking?
Hello, it's
That's a
me,
Bib.
Bib. I'm back.
Yes. I think we are waiting to see when all the people start popping in from the other stream when that moves over before we get started too much. I'm going to watch like the numbers on my phone, which conveniently has dragons on it.
Ooh, very fitting.
Yes. Hello, people. All right. I think that's...
Good
Well,
evening.
it's still saying... Okay, we just moved. Okay. All right. Great. All right, so we should be good to get started then. Let me close that up. Okay. Okay, yeah, we're up to 35, and that'll grow over the next couple of minutes. Wow, there's so many people. Hi, people. Hello. Okay, so I have a
You tell
little
how many
bit...
people there are.
Yeah, I think now it's up to 43. It'll lag what it shows us here in the studio. But yes, okay. I'm gonna get started. Let's see. Where's my thing? Here we go. So hello everyone. I am Madeline James, fantasy author and world builder, and I have with me Biblaridion, fellow
That
world
was
building
not for
YouTube.
me. I'm not applauding myself. That's no.
And relevant for us today, Bib has a focus on speculative biology, which if you haven't seen his Alien Biospheres project, you should check it out after this weekend. But Bib is joining me for this stream to help me, who I have no spec bio experience at all, work out the biology and ecology of the world project I'm working on, which we're calling Pillar World. And obviously there's a focus on dragons, right? Dragons are going to be a big thing later on. But I wrote up a quick, just brief to give you all kind of the high level concept of Pillar World, which is also what I gave over to Bib before we started talking about this. But essentially, Pillar World has a surface that is toxic to humans and most plants and animal life, up to about 1 kilometers up. But there are magically reinforced pillars that have risen up from the ground, think like sheer cliff sides. And the most habitable ones for people are going to be in the 1 to 4 kilometer high range, although there are larger ones, and the pillars do not exceed a rough land area of 20,000 square kilometers. So think the size of Greece, Slovenia, or about a quarter the size of Scotland. But most pillars are going to be in the 500 to 4,000 square kilometer range, so pretty small, like sky islands, essentially. And if you know much about island ecology, there are a lot of unique features, which I'm sure Bib and I will get into later. But I've been working with my patrons on live streams to kind of calculate like the climate impacts, the way rain will fall on these pillars, what biomes we will see, livable regions, etc. But the one big thing I've been holding off on until today is dragons and the biology and such in general, because I want Pillar World to be filled with an entire ecology of dragon types. So like I want big rideable dragons, perhaps some magical dragons, little flightless domesticated dragons, like all sorts of dragons and all the ecological niches, and all of those things. So I sent over my world building notes to Bib, and he has prepared a whole thing for us today to start looking at the biology and the dragons, and we're going to talk through it and workshop it and figure out what we can come up with. So we have a 2-hour stream today, a 1-hour stream tomorrow evening. Yes, I feel like that's the notes I have.
I misread the schedule and thought that we had a 2-hour stream tomorrow. So that means we might have to slightly accelerate our plans and start talking about dragons tonight, maybe. See how it goes.
Yes. Okay. Here we go.
Oh, before we get to that, we have some other ground rules to establish. So, first of all, I think just to get a general vibe of what we're going for here, because yeah, I don't know very much beyond what you sent me, and I did my best to try and incorporate everything you said into my preparation, but just so that we have a common ground here. So, number one, on a scale from 1 to 10, how magical, for lack of a better word, do we want this world to be? 1 being like everything must be absolutely as scientifically feasible as possible, to 10 being there are no rules, it's just magic all the way down, and we can just do whatever we want?
I think I'm good with anywhere from like a 2 to like a 6.5. Like I want like there could be obviously magical interventions, right? Like there is some concept of like a magical deity like creating these pillars in theory and moving, the people around. But so like they could have stepped in at some point if we need it and be like, I'm going to do this thing for some reason. Like that's reasonable. I'm open to the concept of there being like some like species of dragons or like types of dragons that are inherently magical in nature, but I feel like a lot of them I want their general existence to be non-magical, even if there was like, what's the word? Not interruptions, but like if occasional magical beings had an impact at some point in time, right?
Interventions.
Yeah. Interventions, yeah.
Cool. So basically, we're using magic kind of like as a last resort. Like
Mm-hmm.
if we want something cool to happen and there's no way to justify it scientifically, we can just there will be some degree of hand waving involved.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Mm.
So when I read through the thing that you originally sent me,
Mm.
my thought. Oh, that's another question. Even though you have, I think, revealed this at this point, is that when we say that there are dragons in this world, dragons, we're talking like this isn't like typical fantasy where there's like one dragon,
Mm.
living like one dragon per region of the world who's sleeping on a pile of gold, and like you need to go on like an epic quest to find a dragon. There are dragons all over the place, right? Just
Yes.
dragons a go go,
Everywhere.
dragons
All
galore.
dragons everywhere, a commonplace, like all completely interwoven into like culture and society and the way this world works is all dragons.
Cool. So they're a very, very diverse group.
Mm-hmm.
And these dragons, how, as you're envisioning them at the moment, um, how similar to the typical fantasy conception of a dragon are they? Like, the typical sort of flying, reptilian, fire breathing, etc.
I mean, definitely like I want them to vibe as a dragon, right? But like I also want them to be varied enough that you're not like not all of them might necessarily look reptilian. Like they might maybe some of them have like fur or feathers or like I'm open to all of those options or blubber, I don't know. But that's all open. I mean it would always be cool to have like a strain of magical dragons that can breathe fire or something like that. Like I'm open to it. But I feel like I want there to be some that are more like quintessential dragons, right? Like if you picture like maybe like the rideable dragons or something, maybe those being a little bit more traditional-esque, but in general they're going to be varied. So they're going to all look very different. Similar to like if you look at birds, birds look very very different. They can be really weird. So I'm
We
kind of game
debate
to go a little weird for
an
some of them.
entirely separate issue.
Yeah.
I had an argument with a professor about this once, but the long story. So what I'm kind of getting from this is that the dragons are all built around like a similar design where they stick to, I'm guessing, pretty typical tetrapod features. Like they have two eyes, they
Mm,
have walking legs, they have tails, they have heads on necks. Like we're not going to
yeah.
see something like that looks like some sort of weird crustacean with like 10 compound eyes and say, oh look, it's a dragon,
No. No.
Cool.
Like the basic, I guess, what body type, body shape, body whatever, body model. I don't know. Whatever you'd use would be relatively standardized.
Cool. Yeah. So they're all built along a common design.
Mm.
So um my thought process was, we have humans in this setting, right?
Mm. Or
And
we
these
will at
humans,
least.
hmm?
We will at least at some point.
At some point there will be humans, yes.
Yes.
And these humans are, for all intents and purposes, completely indistinguishable to modern humans as we would recognize them, or at least
Yes.
like humans once we've reached the point of like behavioral modernity. Like they're not some like demi-human, like something that's convergently evolved to behave like humans in some way. They are effectively just us.
Yep.
Cool. And we want there also to be domesticates and livestock for these humans, right? So we're going to have things like goats and sheep and chickens and various other things, right?
Potentially, yeah. Like depending on what we need to bring in. Like I'm okay with like instead of chickens having dragons that fit the role of chickens, but like yeah, like things that fit those kinds of roles at least.
Cool. So my first question when looking at this is how do we justify the presence of humans and other modern recognizable animals in a place that is so fundamentally different in nature to the Earth that we know,
Mm.
with these obviously these animals that don't exist in the real world, with like dragons flying around. This is a problem that I had with my own setting, the Refugium, which is where most of my conlangs exist in, because I made that like more than 10 years ago at this point, which is very depressing. But in that
Mm.
setting, I kind of went with this like alternate natural history kind of vibe where there are a lot of animals that we know in the real world don't exist and they're replaced by groups of animals that in our timeline have gone extinct.
Mm.
And I thought that was quite fun, but the more you kind of interrogate it, the less sense it makes. Because like I have one continent where there's both calicotheres, which are like large, essentially gorilla horses, if you can imagine
Mm.
that. And there's also
Okay.
terror birds, and terror birds evolved in South America, whereas
Mm.
calicotheres evolved in Eurasia, and they evolved under very different circumstances. Like, why are these two groups just sort of randomly together on the same landmass? I didn't really handle it particularly well
Mm.
looking back. But anyway, the point is, I think we need a consistent explanation for how this world came to be the way it is, other
Yes.
than the divine intervention of just pillars appearing. In
Right.
terms of the biology, how are the dragons related to everything else? And I think the cleanest way of doing it, and this doesn't need to be explained or overtly stated anywhere in the actual story, it could just be like
Mm.
a background um, meta explanation,
Yeah.
is that humans are not native to this place.
Mm.
Humans and all of their domesticates and livestock, etc., they, again, for whatever reason, through divine intervention, were brought to this place.
Mm-hmm.
So the dragons then would be native to this place. And if the dragons are reminiscent of, not exactly the same as, but reminiscent to animals that we have in our world in the sense that they're built up along the same sort of vertebrate body plan, like I
Mm.
said, 4 limbs, head with 2 eyes, a mouth, etc., then that means that they must have evolved from animals that were quite similar to ones that exist on Earth. So, how do we reconcile this? And so this, if you've been looking at the screen for the past however many minutes, you might be wondering why I have a PowerPoint about the late Triassic.
Yeah. Probably
So,
shouldn't have brought that up yet, but whoops.
no, it's foreshadowing. It's good. So my idea, and you are completely free to reject this idea at any point if you don't like the way it's going,
Mm.
is that Pillar World used to be, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same as our world
Mm-hmm.
until about 230 million years ago, when this interdimensional mist, whatever it is that makes the surface uninhabitable, comes through. And
Mm-hmm.
then the whole pillar thing happens. And from that point, the biological evolutionary history of Pillar World diverges from our own.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I've taken the liberty of putting together this presentation to show you what the world was like, or would have been like at the time just before the pillar thing happened, because not all, but at least some of the animals that are present in Pillar World, including the dragons, will be descendants of the animals that were in this time period.
Yeah.
So this is basically just a very long, rambly excuse for me to talk to you about the late Triassic, because I really like it. It's one of my favorite periods in Earth's history. And I picked specifically the Carnian stage because I think that gives us the most options.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do I make this work? That is not my mouse. That's why that's not working. So, I should also mention, it is completely coincidental that 4 days ago, Paleoanalysis posted a video about the history of the Triassic. I was already working on this while that video came out. So if you want a much more in-depth history of the Triassic, go and watch that video. And it is
Ooh.
also completely coincidental that my good friend C.M. Kozemen, the author of All Tomorrows, 2 days ago put out a video about the diversity of the Tanystrophiids, which is a group that I do not include in this presentation. So
Okay.
I don't know why, but this is just a very Triassic-themed week, apparently. So
I mean, they feel our vibes that we're putting out into the universe.
yeah, more stuff to watch if you'd like. So
Mhm.
in this time in Earth's history, so this is during the Triassic, and am I remembering correctly that you have some background in geology?
I was a geology major for a while. Not a very, very long time, but like enough that I've taken all the intro courses. And I wanted to be a paleoclimatologist, but
Ooh,
kind of hard, and so I ended up being a software engineer instead. Not like hard to do, but well, okay, yes,
being a
but like
software engineer is so much easier.
it's easier to find a job and not have to move to Boulder, Colorado, which is basically the only place that
Mm,
you have paleoclimatology here, other than like at universities and stuff. So, yeah.
cool. Well, then some of this might be familiar to you because at this time, as I say, I've chosen about 230 million years ago. We've just entered the late Triassic period, which is a period where before this point, the world has been pretty dry because this is when Pangaea was still a thing. All the continents were joined together in the supercontinent of Pangaea.
Mm,
Uh, so most of the continental interior would have been very arid. But then this thing happens called the Carnian pluvial episode, which is basically it starts raining all over the world, everywhere, and it keeps raining for 2 million years straight. Long story. But because of that, the world gets covered in swamps and becomes much more verdant in general. And there's
mm,
this famously weird proliferation of life that happens during this time where there's just so many really, really weird groups that come about during this time, which is part of the reason why I thought it would be good as a place to find some ancestral dragons.
mm,
So, what have we got? We've got right. So the one of the major groups that kicks off during this time period is the group that we call the Archosaurs. And the Archosaurs, um, there's only two Archosaur groups left alive in the modern world, and that's birds and crocodilians. But at one point, the Archosaurs were much more diverse. So, of not all, but a very large number, well, it kind of depends on what you count. But for all intents and purposes, all archosaurs are grouped into one of these two lineages: the Pseudotsuchia, which are called the crocodile line archosaurs, which is
mm,
very confusing because pseudo means false and suchia means crocodile, so it means false crocodiles. So you would think
mm.
that they wouldn't be crocodiles, but actually they are crocodiles. The crocodiles belong in the Pseudotsuchians. It's very confusing.
Okay.
And the other group is the Avimetatarsalians, which are the bird-line archosaurs. And
Mm,
so they see a really, really big explosion in diversity around this time. So one of the major groups is called the Rawasuchians, which, yes, I know that they're actually polyphyletic now, which is a shame, but I'm just going to use the term because it's still widely recognized. So the
mm,
Rawasuchians are basically the biggest carnivores in the world at the time, and some of the biggest terrestrial carnivores ever. They kind of look like if you imagine a heavily built crocodile with like really like raised up on long elongated legs,
mhm.
that's kind of what you get. So this is a pretty standard species, Polonosuchus, or genus rather.
Yeah.
Um, and it was 6 meters long, and some of them got even bigger. Some of them topped, I think, 10 meters, and they
Oh, wow.
included some of the largest terrestrial carnivores other than the dinosaurs ever.
That is
And
cool.
then other archosaurs include the Poposauroids, which, looking at this, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is a dinosaur. It's not a dinosaur. It's more closely related to crocodiles than it is to dinosaurs. It just happens to evolve a very theropod dinosaur-like body plan. It's they're bipedal predators. In fact, when they were first discovered, they were thought for a time to be dinosaurs. There's a fossil I really like called Smock. That's just Smock, yeah, named after a Polish dragon. And there's still a lot of debate about whether or not it is a dinosaur or whether it's one of these false dinosaurs. So I've got the Poposauroids. Another group of archosaurs are the phytosaurs. And again, you'd be forgiven looking at this picture for thinking that these are crocodiles. But they're not crocodiles. They actually evolved a crocodile-like shape completely independently. But they are pseudosuchian, so they are crocodile-like, the crocodile line archosaurs that are not crocodiles in the group that are called the false crocodiles, which actually include crocodiles.
It's not confusing at all.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So we have these, just look remarkably similar to crocodiles. This one's a weird one. So another group of crocodile line archosaurs. We have the itosaurs, which are kind of like the mammalian equivalent of armadillos. They've got these really distinctive rows of plates of armor along their back, and in lots of different species, they have other like spikes and protrusions along the back as well. These were primarily herbivorous, and during this time, they only just sort of arrived on the scene. Their diversity was just starting to pick up. What else have we got? We've got the Lagopatids. Now, these are the first group that are not the crocodile line archosaurs. These are the bird line archosaurs. Okay. So these are just some characteristic genera, Venatoraptor and Ixalopeton, and you can see they kind of look. You can see they're kind of reptilian, but they're also kind of not reptilian because they do have this integument, this pelage. They're covered in this sort of fuzzy stuff. And they kind of are starting to show resemblance to their possible descendants, the pterosaurs. And the pterosaurs, despite what some people think are not dinosaurs, but they are fairly closely related to dinosaurs. They are also bird-line archosaurs. And it's very frustrating because there is very little in the fossil record that separates this from this. It kind of goes from this to this in one go, and we haven't yet found the transitional fossils between them. So there's a lot about how exactly the pterosaurs first evolved that's still not really known. We don't know how exactly they evolved their wing membranes, etc. So that's quite frustrating. But yes, close relative of the pterosaurs are the dinosaurs themselves. And the dinosaurs are bird-line archosaurs, and it's about this time that they, again, first come on the scene. And for the most part, during this period, they were still relatively small and inconspicuous, whereas the other archosaurs really take up most of the ecological niches. The dinosaurs during this time really don't play much of a significant part. It's not until much later, at the end of the Triassic, that the dinosaurs really start to pick up and essentially take over the world and become the major group of dominant large terrestrial animals.
Okay.
And then what else have we got? We've got the rhynchosaurs. The rhynchosaurs, now these are not archosaurs, they are archosauromorphs. So they don't quite fit the definition of bird line or crocodile line. They're sort of a sister group outside of all of that. And they kind of look like the reptilian equivalent of gophers. Like, they have this really weird shaped head with these really wide cheek flanges and these incisors that are sort of shaped a little bit like a rodent's, or almost like a sort of beak-like structure. And they were very successful, primarily herbivorous. And there's one fossil in particular, this one, Hyperodapodon, that becomes ridiculously diverse during this time period. They were just all over the place. Then we've got, I had to include this one. This is one of my favorite fossils of all time. This is Charovipteryx. So Charovipteryx and related species are possibly the only group of animals ever in all of history to evolve a gliding membrane out of their back legs rather than their front legs. So they had this crazy like delta wing structure going on. And
Cool.
there is one other fossil called Ozimec, which may be related to Charovipteryx, but it might not be. There are some analyses that place it within the Tanistrophiids, in which case that would mean that this weird delta wing thing happened twice, which would be even weirder. So, yeah, lots of really weird stuff going on in the time period. And then my beloved, the Trypanosauromorphs. This is another very diverse and very, very weird group of reptiles. It's still not 100% known what their relationship is with other groups of reptiles, but they had some really, really weird members. Like Trypanosaurus is kind of like it's got this really weird bird-like head. In fact, when it was first discovered, it was suggested that it was actually the ancestor of modern birds because it had such a bird-like head. But that's completely convergently evolved. It's got this sort of weird beak and these very large forward-facing eyes. It's got this weird hump in its back. Granted, it's not brilliantly clear with the size of this image, but it's got this weird sort of crest along its back. It's got these really, really weird front legs. I could go on a long tangent about how weird the anatomy of the front legs is, but it's not hugely relevant. But you can just about see on the second toe, they've got one really big sickle-shaped claw, and they've got this weird thick tail, and at the end of the tail, there is another sickle-shaped claw at the tip. So they're like some sort of weird bird, chameleon, lizard thing.
I like
very,
it.
very, very strange. And other closely related species include Longosquema, this one, which has this absolutely ridiculous looking, I don't know what that is, on its back. Yeah, still not known why, what the function was, but it's just unusually extravagant. And then down here, you can just about see we've got Hyperonecta, which is it's got this really long, broad, leaf-shaped tail. And there have been some suggestions that it might have had a gliding membrane as well, although I don't really see how that would make sense. But yeah, trypanosaurs, these are also one of the first groups of animals in the fossil record that are adapted to life in the trees. They're some of the first specialist arboreal animals, which is pretty cool. Then we have the Lepidosaurs, and the Lepidosaurs are not related to the Archosaurs. They're off on their own separate group, and they include the ancestors of lizards and another group called the Rhynchocephalians. Lizards, obviously, still alive today. The Rhynchocephalians were another group of lizard-like animals that were very successful during the time of the dinosaurs, but afterwards they didn't recover so well. And so today there is only one species of Rhynchocephalian left, and that's this thing. This is the Tuatara, which is only found on New Zealand. Yeah, the last of its kind. So we've got Lepidosaurs. Man, I put a lot of things in this presentation, I'm realizing. So now we come to the Dicynodonts. Again, these are not related to the Archosaurs or the Lepidosaurs. This is part of their own separate group, sometimes called the stem mammals, because they are broadly related to mammals. They're more closely related to mammals than they are to what we would think of as reptiles. But their characteristic feature is they've got this weird face where they've got a sort of turtle-like beak, and they also have a pair of downward-pointing tusks. And the Dicynodonts actually evolved much earlier on than the Triassic. They were around during the Permian, like many tens of millions of years before this point. And they sort of start declining around this time, but they still had some very, very large representatives. They were some of the largest herbivores around in some places, like this. On the bottom here is Lysoecia, which is about the size of an elephant. So they were still doing pretty well, despite the fact that they were on the decline at this time. closely related to the dicynodonts, but not in the same group, confusingly, are the cynodonts, not the dicynodonts. The cynodonts, completely different. They are also stem mammals. And this was when they were starting to really diversify, lots of variation in forms here, and particularly one group of the cynodonts, the mammalia forms, first starts to appear around this time. This is the first time that we see the first true mammals. The true mammals are like the brand new kid on the block. They've just shown up.
Mm-hmm.
So, the point of that, the reason why I've done that for the past like 20 minutes,
Yeah.
is just to give you this sort of snapshot of what the major groups were during this time period.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I say, it is this point in history where Pillar World diverges from our own world. So, the major groups of animals that we have on Pillar World are likely to descend from these. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it just so happens that in our world, almost all of these groups died out.
Mm-hmm.
The only exceptions being the mammaliforms, the dinosaurs, the lepidosaurs, and I didn't include them here, but the crocodilomorphs,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of sad. But with Pillar World, it's entirely up to you how many of these make it into the present day. It's especially dependent, number one, when the whole Pillar World thing happened, when the pillars first rose from the ground,
Yes.
how delicate of a process was this? Was it like the animals on the pillars were like unharmed completely? Were they like, was there special divine intervention to make sure that they were safe as the pillars were created, or was it essentially like a tremendous earth buckling and suddenly these vast pillars just shot into the sky? Because that would essentially act as a mass extinction event.
Right. I mean, I feel like there would be some level of like, because part of the like magic that creates this pillar is like maintains like it not overly eroding or maintaining the stability of it. So I feel like there would have been a level of protection that would have been involved there natively. So I don't think we would have seen like a complete mass extinction event. There definitely like would have been some impacts. And also like it wasn't like the whole land area that existed at the time was shot up, but like, yeah, a light jostling as certain areas shot up and others did not.
Okay. So, yeah, in that case, it really is entirely up to you which ones live and which ones die.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about this a bit later when we get into actual island biogeography. But because dispersal is inherently so limited in this world with the way that the pillars are set up, that means that on each different pillar, you could have a completely, totally unique assemblage of animals. So it's like you could be on one pillar and it could be dominated by like Drepanosaurs, for example. That could be just all of the animals that you would see around you could be descendants of Drepanosaurs. And then on the next pillar over is nothing but Dicynodonts. And so there's no commonality in animals at all.
Right.
So I definitely don't need to decide this now, but whichever ones you like from all of these, we can incorporate those into the native fauna of Pillar World. And of
Okay.
course, dragons are going to come from one of these. But we'll get to that a bit later, I think.
Okay.
Because the other issue, as we've said, humans and all of their livestock come from somewhere else. That shall be largely mysterious. So, are you picturing like humans and all of their livestock as being like the minority in this world? Like there are small human settlements and they have like little farmsteads and things, but by and large it's like a completely wild world with all of these really weird creatures running around? Or is it more like humans have kind of taken over and most of the animals on the pillars are like ones that we would recognize, and occasionally you find a really weird looking thing like one of these? What sort of
I
balance are we going for?
So I think it would depend on where you are, right? Like, so pillars that are going to be like less hospitable to like larger human settlements will probably be completely wild, obviously, with this sort of a thing. And also the like seeding of humans is going to happen in a bunch of different areas at one time, but like maybe like 20
Mm.
pillars to start, and then they'll kind of spread from there a little bit as they get access to like technologies to like hot air balloons or rideable dragons or whatever, right? To kind of proliferate through the pillars a little bit. But where human settlements have cropped up and become more like densely populated on the pillars, I imagine it would be mostly like the humans and then whatever their domesticates are, either ones they brought with them or ones they have domesticated from the native populations. But then there would still obviously be plenty of other areas that are rarer, right? And could have whatever on them.
Okay. So there would be like islands of weirdness.
Yes.
Very, very good. Very
Mhm.
good. And you mentioned the possibility of some of these native groups being domesticated by the humans. Yeah,
Yes.
that's quite fun.
Yeah. I do like the idea that, especially the dragons, especially, but also potentially other ones too.
Yes. So with that, shall we talk about island biogeography first? I think we should talk about island biogeography first. Okay.
Mm.
So, how should I do this? I should have thought this through.
What
Yeah,
do
how do I share my screen? It's
the
not
little
letting
plus
me
thing
share
at the
my screen.
bottom? The great yeeting. I like that. For the pillar building. It's funny.
For some reason, it's not letting me share my drawing software again.
That's annoying.
Share screen. No, it's just not there. Do you have anything up at the moment? Because all I can see is a black screen.
No, it's just right now it's just us. I mean, it would put it down below when you shared it, and then we'd be able to pull it up.
Nope, it's not having it.
I mean, worst case, you could always draw stuff locally and occasionally take screenshots and send it to me, and then I can put the screenshots up.
Oh, that's too much effort. No, it's just not having it. Let me just try brief intermission while I figure out how this works.
No worries. Let's see if there's anything going on in the chat. Lots of people had theories. Oh, I'm assuming this is David. I think David wants to ride the Cynodontian.
I mean, technically, those already exist because all modern mammals fall within the cynodont group. The cynodonts are like the larger group that includes all modern mammals and some other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really don't know why this isn't working because it was working on the last one.
Yeah. I don't think I have any weird settings. Guests can stream. Guests can do whatever they want.
Because I'm gonna kind of need this at some point.
David wants the massive beaver rat. I'm unsurprised by this. We'll call him Mr. Lovey.
Nope, it's just not recognizing that I can share anything. That's a great shame.
It's weird. I mean, I wonder. I mean, we could try to be more crazy. You could try to like share with me on, like, if you create a call on Discord, and then I can screen share your screen share with me on Discord.
Way too much effort. I can't do that. That's I definitely don't want to leave the studio.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. There's no way for me to like draw in this, is there?
I don't think so. No. No.
This is going to be a real dent in my plan then.
I'm not sure what would do it.
Should I try leaving and coming back?
You can try it. Yeah. See if that helps.
Okay.
I can be solo streaming for a minute.
Just 1 second.
Now that I have you all alone. I don't know. What are we talking about? Beaver Rat for geoengineering. David's got to teach Mr. Levy Nulisu. I don't know what the U with the 2 dots over it, how that's pronounced. Nulitis with Nulisu. I like to imagine writing a Shringosaurus, but bred to be slightly bigger. Helen McCain. Have you tried turning it off and on again? What did you miss? It's pronounced like I. Wait, but like I, the IPA character, or I, like how I, as a uncultured, non-IPA speaking person, would pronounce I? Is that like eh? Imagine shouting meat. E. Okay, meat. Okay. I got it. All right.
What are we talking about? Meat?
How to pronounce Nulis E? Nulisi, I guess. Nulisi, I guess.
E.
Nulisi.
Yeah, if you make E, but then you just round your lips like it's like halfway in between an E and an oo. It's like you round your lips like you would say an oo, but you have your tongue forward in your mouth, so it's like E.
David's very upset right now. It's a really good thing, David, that you were not in any of the IPA class time streams I did, because you probably would have been like, "What are you doing?" It's fine. It's fine.
No, it's still not letting me do it. That's a real pain. Well, I guess I have no choice but to just soldier on and do things verbally.
Yeah, I mean, we'll make do. In worst case, if you need me to pull up something to draw, and if there's anything that like I can easily sketch out, I can do that. But I feel like that's less effective.
Well, we'll see how it goes. So, island biogeography. So, islands are defined by their isolation. So, the thing about continents is that they're generally quite big. And if there are no barriers in the way, generally animals will spread out and cover very large areas of the world. And generally, the larger a region over which a species is spread, then the less vulnerable it is to extinction, generally. So, in our world, we have continents, and so we have Afro-Eurasia, and we have Australia. We have Antarctica, which is currently over the South Pole, so not doing too much, with the exception of penguins. And we have, until very recently, we had South America as a separate continent. Just within the last few million years, it collided with North America, which is a shame because there were so many cool things on South America, and most of them ended up dying. However, on islands, you are inherently limited in your dispersal. You cannot generally speaking, you cannot get from one island to another island. Now, there are ways that you can do that. For example, you can fly if you are a flying species, which is one of the reasons why dragons are going to be so successful. That's, I think, the main reason why dragons will have effectively taken over the world and become such a common sight, is because, yeah, they are the only major group that can fly. I'm going to talk about adaptations for flight later. The thing is, the smaller an island is, the more vulnerable it is to extinction. And especially on Pillar World, because in our world, when we talk about islands, we're talking about islands like in the sea. And it is possible for animals to cross stretches of sea, either just by swimming or by rafting, because occasionally animals will get swept out to sea on like a mat of driftwood, for example. And they can make surprisingly far distances on mats of driftwood, like the classic example being caviomorph rodents, which are things like capybaras. Their ancestors came from Africa, because at some point within the last 30 million years or so, a group of these African rodents were washed out to sea on just some twigs and logs and things, and they apparently managed to make it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Granted, the Atlantic Ocean was a little bit smaller then than it is now, but still, they made it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, all the way to South America, and miraculously, they survived the trip. And that is how capybaras and related species came to be. And not only did they survive, but they actually became extremely successful. But on Pillar World, you don't have that option. You can't, unless you can fly, you can't get from one pillar to the next.
Yeah.
And so that means that on each of these pillars, there's going to be, the ecosystems are going to be very limited in their dispersal. No, the Pillow World is a different thing.
I know, I was like, David.
So on each of these pillars, the other thing about islands is because that they're generally smaller than continents, there's only so much diversity that they can support. Something's happening.
Pizza.
Ooh, very nice. There's only so much diversity that an island can support, and the amount of diversity an island can support will depend on its size. So bigger islands will have larger, more complex ecosystems, if you want to frame it like that. Whereas the smaller an island is, the fewer species it will have, generally the less evolutionary competition there will be, and the more vulnerable the animals will be to extinction. So, question for you, are you able to share your screen? Because
yes.
I would like to have another look at those maps, because I tried to copy them earlier and it wouldn't let me.
Let's see. I can pull up our notes screen here. This might be easiest to just scroll to the ones I sent you. Is this what you want, or do you want me to pull up like the full maps?
Whichever is easier to see, really.
Okay. Let me take that down. We want Pillar World. Documents, Pillar World. Global mapping. Oh, because I sent you one of the archipelago clusters. Do you want biomes, climates, elevation? Which do you want first?
Oh boy. Let's look at climates. Why not?
Okay. So let me share screen. These guys. All right. So this is the climates map. At least the starting one I've got from working on with patrons. So if you're a patron, you will recognize this because we did this together.
Cool. And is there size anywhere?
Yes. So this square is 500 square kilometers. So this little line is 22.3 kilometers. So this is a relatively small area.
Yeah, relatively small, but some of these islands are fairly big. Others are quite small. And so essentially if we're assuming that time in Pillar World progresses congruently with like our own time, so like when the humans showed up, like 230 million years will have passed since the whole pillar thing happened.
Mm.
And that means that, number one, the Triassic animals that give rise to all of the animals on Pillar World will have had 230 million years to evolve, and so they will likely look very, very different to their Triassic ancestors. So it's not like it's going to be like a carbon copy of the Triassic. There's going to be a lot more diversity and weirdness to that. But
Yeah.
also, I would expect on a lot of the smaller islands, because smaller islands are so much more vulnerable to extinction events,
Mm.
that means a lot of the smaller ones would have just been kind of scoured of life.
Mm.
But that means that they will be freed up for dragons and other flying animals,
Mm.
if there are other flying animals, to inhabit, because all of that empty space where those ecosystems once were will now be available. And then we're going to talk about flightlessness. Nate, will we talk about flightlessness? Yeah, we'll talk about flightlessness a little bit later.
Okay.
So I expect what might happen over the course of evolutionary time is that a lot of the smaller islands will get effectively taken over by dragons. So dragons, flightless dragons, effectively. So you'll have dragons in the air. You'll have dragons on most of the smaller islands. You'll have humans and their domesticates, which may, I don't know, if our world is anything to go by, they might have some pretty severe impacts on the ecosystems of the islands that they show up on.
Yeah.
So effectively, the original Triassic fauna will only be present on certain suitably large islands across the world, effectively. So they'll be almost like hidden sort of refugia that feel very distinctly different from the rest of the world. So, what else can I tell you about islands? The big thing about islands, Foster's rule. And Foster's rule is a sort of, I want to say double-edged sword. That's not quite the right expression, but there's two aspects to Foster's rule. Foster's rule on its own is basically that the size of an animal will be contingent on the amount of resources in its habitat, which sounds really obvious. Like, yeah, if there's more food, they can get bigger. But this is especially relevant on islands, because on islands, since they are by their very nature smaller than continents, they have fewer resources available than continents. And therefore, one of the big tendencies that we see on islands is insular dwarfism. So animals that on the mainland tend to be quite large, when they find their way to islands, they tend to get smaller. So classic example of this has happened to elephants, I don't even know how many times, but there are a bunch of islands across the world that elephants have found their way to one way or another, just swimming across narrow channels. They find themselves on some island, and they just don't really need to be big anymore, and there aren't really enough resources on the island for them to remain big, so they shrink down and they become pygmy mammoths. So that is just one of the many things we can do to make the Triassic animals weirder. We can take some of the very big ones like Lysowisia, that big elephant-sized cynodont, and yeah, we can make it the size of a pig or something. In fact, that's another example of insular dwarfism. There's a kind of bovid. I think it's it's a buffalo. I think it's called the anoa, and I think it's in Malaysia. ANOA, and it's essentially like a dwarf cow. I think you're still muted.
It's so cute.
Yeah, tiny buffalo. And we even have some examples of insular dwarfism in dinosaurs as well, in non-avian dinosaurs specifically. So there's a dinosaur called Europasaurus, which is a sauropod. And sauropods are famous for being really ridiculously big. They're the big long-necked ones. and Europasaurus. I can't actually remember. Is Europasaurus on Hatzeg? I think Europasaurus is from Hatzeg. Hatzeg is this island that existed during the time of the non-avian dinosaurs. And so it found its way to this island, and it became, in terms of sauropods, it became very, very small, like more or less the size of like a cow today. A little bit bigger than that, but still, for a sauropod, very, very small. So that's one. Oh yes, that's a good point, Magpie. We also have an example of insular dwarfism in humans, because there's a species or possibly subspecies of humans, Homo floresiensis, which were found on the island of Flores. We still don't know exactly how or when they got there. And yeah, they were nicknamed the hobbits because they're considerably smaller than most other hominid species. So insular dwarfism is a big thing that can happen. The other big thing that can happen is the exact opposite, insular gigantism. Because generally, on small islands, because there's less diversity, that means there's less competition. And if there's, especially, small islands very rarely have big predators, just because there's not enough resources to sustain big predators. So the big predators usually die out pretty quickly if they find themselves on islands. So that gives the opportunity for small predators to move into those niches. And so they consequently get much larger. The Tenerife giant rat, for example, on the island of Tenerife, there's this species of very large rat. Dinogalarix is a cool one. It's at some point, I can't actually remember how long ago it was, but at some point there was an island off the coast of Italy called Gorgano, and there was a kind of hedgehog that found its way to this island, and it got much bigger and turned into this really scary badger-like carnivorous thing. It's very fun. So yeah, my plan was that while I would present to you with all of this, I would start like doodling stuff because I've got my tablet and things. But until it lets me share my screen, I can't actually do that, which is very frustrating. Just going to try one more time.
I don't know what pizza I have here. I had a sausage one, and this one has like, I don't know, onions, and I think this is like a Philly cheesesteak style pizza. I don't know. That's what I got for you. Also, people had the idea for a kiwi dragon, which is epic.
Yes, we will be having flightless dragons. That is one of the many things that we'll be discussing. I really wish I could make this work. This is very frustrating. Because it was working fine earlier. If you take this away that we've got on the screen now.
I'm not personally a big onion on pizza fan, just to relate to all that. It's just what was handed to me on a plate, so.
Someone was having this discussion the other night. I remember this.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. If I do that.
Ooh.
Can we see things?
We got it.
Okay. Good.
Don't ever take it off.
Get to work. Okay. I still don't have a working mouse, but that's fine. Okay. So we're already an hour in. So considering we only have 1 hour tomorrow night, and we really are here for like the dragons, that's like the main thing we're here for. I think we should probably accelerate our plans and start talking about the dragons now.
I'll never say no to that.
Cool. And if there's time, we will talk about some of the other things that might exist on Pillar World at the end of it. So, first question with dragons is, what are their ancestors? What group of the list of Triassic animals that I gave you,
Mhm.
which of those will give rise to the dragons? First of all, do you have any particular preferences? If you're
So
able to see the images again.
yes, I went and found the doc and I pulled that up so I can sort of see them.
Cool.
So I feel like the ones that I lean towards, I like the pterosaurs, the ones that look like the little like fuzzy lizard rodent things. I do like those. I do, or maybe that's no, that's it's the one above it. The lager petids. I think the label's above it actually. So it's the lager petids. Is it beer?
And now my tablet's not working. Great.
Okay. Let me.
I hate technology. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second.
Okay. Then while you're doing that, let me share this real quick so I can talk to which ones I like. I do like these two. Oh no, we've lost a bib. Oh, they've taken their microcam off. Yes. Let's see. I think we have a bib screen. Pterosaurs are fuzzy too, are they? Oh yeah. Yeah, the later ones, yeah. Which are cool. Okay. We have a bib again.
Okay, now I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
One of these days. Oh, look, now it's actually letting me share the file I want. That's great. Okay. Oh my god. Ah. I tell you, I am cursed. Just technology never, ever, ever does the thing I want it to.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But okay.
Okay, yes. So,
I like these.
which ones are these? Because I can't see them now.
The lagerpetids.
The Lagurpatids, yeah.
I like those. I do kind of like the Edisaurs, the ones with the banded armor down the back. Like that could be a cool look for a dragon. I feel like those are my favorites. Although I mean, like
Cool.
Mr. The weird turtle face with the tusks is. I mean, it's hard to say no to that face. It's a cute face.
The Dicynodont.
Yeah. Because I feel like going with something that gives us a lot of like options to be a little bit varied would be good. But I think vibe wise, the Lagurpatids is my favorite. But like I know we can like they'll look very different. So like kind of any of those three directions, I feel like would be good with me.
Cool. Of those three, just from a purely like biological feasibility perspective, I would also vote for the Lagurpatids because while the Ichthyosaurs and the Dicynodonts are very cool, they are generally quite heavy set animals. There were some smaller species, but really, and we're going to talk about this more in a second, one of the main things about flight is that so much of it comes down to weight saving adaptations. You really do need to be as small and lightweight and agile as possible. Whereas the Lagurpatids were already kind of there because they're the thing that gave rise to the pterosaurs and the dinosaurs in turn gave rise to the birds. So if you like the Lagurpatids, I would say that's a pretty safe one to go with.
Sold.
Cool. So we're doing the Lagurpatids, and another big advantage with doing that is that the Archosaurs, I don't actually know at what point this happened. I think it might be ancestral to all Archosaurs. I don't know. But Archosaurs have this particular adaptation where they've got these weird air sacs throughout their body. It's kind of complicated, and to be honest, I don't fully understand how some of it works. But they've got this very complicated respiratory system that lets them breathe very efficiently. And it also makes them surprisingly lightweight for their size. And that is a really useful pre-adaptation for flight. Because in order to fly, you need a number of anatomical specializations, again, which we will talk about in much more detail momentarily. But the chief one is that you need a really efficient respiratory system. You need to be able to breathe efficiently enough to take in as much oxygen to power the musculature that you need to produce the constant aerodynamic force. So having this built-in efficient respiratory system is just going to be a really, really useful pre-adaptation. So I think the logopetids are a good pick, is basically what I'm saying.
Perfect.
So if we go with them, the next question is, what does their wing structure look like? Because in terms of evolving a wing, there's several theories as to how exactly you go from something that doesn't have a wing to something that has a wing, but honestly, it's for the sake of time, we can just skip over that. We can just assume that they start jumping and gliding and eventually something like a wing evolves. But the way that wing looks can be very different between different groups. So in the history of life on Earth, in our world, flight has evolved independently 4 separate times. Once in the insects, and we're not really going to talk about them because they're arthropods and they work differently. Number 2, and by the way, this is in the order in which these different groups evolved. Number 2, in the pterosaurs, which again, the logopetids may be the ancestors of, maybe. Number 3, the birds. And number 4, the bats. So these 3 are all vertebrate animals, and in every case, all 3 of these groups adapted a wing out of the forelimb. So if you imagine, let's just do a generalized vertebrate forelimb. You've got like a shoulder here, you've got the proximal portion of the arm, that's the humerus. You've got the lower arm, which is the radius and ulna. And then you've got a hand with, most of the time, 5 digits. So that, by and large, most tetrapods have a limb that looks like that. And in the case of these flying animals, they evolved their wings from this structure, but they all did it in a slightly different way. So the pterosaurs, first of all, if you look at their wings, they've still got 4 little fingers here, but essentially the pinky finger is really, really long. And then there's a web of skin that connects across like that.
Okay.
In birds, it's a little bit different. The birds have lost most of their fingers, and the remnants of 2 of their fingers have actually fused together. Because obviously birds, with the exception of the hoatzin, don't really have any claws on their wings. So it's similar, but they've lost the remnants of the fingers. And the fingers that form this part of the wing come from different fingers on the hand. And also, obviously, birds have feathers. Oh, that's another thing, while it occurs to me. Another reason the logopetids are a good choice is because the logopetids have this particular kind of body covering. They have these, it's sometimes called dino fuzz. It's this not quite fur and not quite feathers, and it's believed to be essentially homologous with the feathers in birds and with the fur or pycnofibers in pterosaurs. Basically, pterosaurs are covered in a very fine layer of sort of downy fur, and birds obviously are covered in feathers. And both of those structures come from this dino fuzz that was present in the Lagopatid. So that means that with our dragons, we can justify, we can have some groups of dragons that have feathers, some that have fur, some that adapt them into quills or spines. There's lots of different options of stuff
I like
that we
it.
can do with that.
Okay.
And of course, some that just lose the fur and just become like scaly. Yeah, lots of different possibilities there. But then to continue the final group, bats. So we have a shoulder, an elbow, and bats, they'll probably be familiar. They've got one little thumb claw, and then the remaining 4 fingers have elongated, and there's a web of skin stretched between them. So those are the 3 different ways that the 3 groups of flying tetrapods have evolved wings in the real world.
Okay.
So if we wanted to, we could just copy one of these and say that our Lagopatid dragons just have a wing that looks exactly like one of these, or we could be a little bit more creative, because there are some variations that we can put on this. Like one of them, in fact, I might have to look up because I'm doubting myself now. Oh, well, one of them that I'll bring up is that there are a surprising number of gliding reptiles that have I don't actually know if there's a specific name for them, but if you look at like there's a genus of lizards that is called Draco, which oddly enough means dragon. And if you Google a picture of them, you'll see that they've got body, they've got like legs, and they've got a gliding membrane.
All I see is Draco Pistols and Draco Malfoy.
Not quite the one we're looking for.
Okay, here we go.
Does Draco lizard give you anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they've got these little gliding membranes on their side, and they are supported by these long, thin bits of bone that are actually the ribs.
Oh.
So when they jump, they actually like spread their rib cage open to turn it into this structure, which is really, really weird.
Yeah.
And there are a whole bunch of other extinct reptiles that have convergently evolved that same thing. There's one called Coelosaurus that does that. There's another one whose name I don't actually know how to pronounce. It's called like, help me chat. What's it called? It begins with a K. It's like Cuneosaurus. Is that it?
They're so weird looking.
Something like that. Yes, thank
you.
Yeah,
okay.
Kue. I don't know how that's intended to be pronounced, but Cueneosaurus, something like that. The point is that this is an adaptation that's happened a lot in reptiles. So now, thinking about it, I don't think that would make too much sense for the dragons to do, because this adaptation with the rib cage has only happened in gliding reptiles, where the wing membrane is just static. You just spread out the ribs and just sort of keep them like that. Yeah. Whereas if you need them to flap, then you're going to have quite strong muscles, and those muscles need to anchor to a very strong sternum. Like if you look at the skeleton of some birds, they have a sternum that has this really pronounced process, this sort of keel at the front, and that's just all this space for the chest muscles to attach to. And if your rib cage is just sort of splayed open like that, that's just not really going to form a stable place for the muscles to attach. But that's not necessarily, we can work around that. I'm kind of thinking on my feet here. But if we say, for example, that, so there are in many tetrapods, not in mammals, but in a lot of reptiles, there's this series of bones called the gastralia, also called the belly ribs, which are these series of, essentially just sort of floating ribs along the abdomen. So we could say, again, this is entirely just aesthetic. It just depends on what you want the wings of these dragons to look like. So we could theoretically say that they have, a wing that looks kind of like that, but they also have, like, if this is the body, they also have some like additional supports that come out like this and like connect it to the body. Which reminds me actually of another group of not quite flying animals. And they've got a terrible, terrible name. They're called the Scansoriopterigidae. Dreadful name. But what they've got, humerus, radius, and ulna. Now, this is where my memory kind of fails me, so I might need chat's help with this, or I could just look it up, actually. I'm going to cheat. Give me 1 second. I can't actually remember how many fingers they have.
Oh. Those are a look.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really weird. So they've got like a finger here. Got like another finger here. So they're kind of bat-like in the sense, or pterosaur-like in the sense that they have some fingers over here, and they have one finger forming part of the wing membrane, and then they've got another bone, which is actually not a finger. It's a single solid piece of bone that's called the styloform element that like sticks down like that, and then that forms the wing. So the point is, we have lots of different options for how the wing could be structured. So at this point, do any of these appeal to you in particular?
I mean, so I feel like I lean towards the pterosaur one, honestly, but it depends on like, is there any hope of getting to a 6-limbed creature at the end of this, do you think? Or do you think because that kind of depends, because like if we're only going to have 4 limbs, wings, and legs, then I like the pterosaur look because it has still has sort of hands-ish, like for like climbing things. Like I feel like that gives us more options if it goes into a more flightless version later on, and also just because,
Sure. Yeah, this is a tricky one because generally speaking, it would be much easier to justify a wing evolving out of the front legs, and therefore the thing that we'll end up with will necessarily have just 2 back legs and 2 forelegs, which are also the wings, as opposed to what you see in like some classical depictions of dragons where they have 2 pairs of walking legs and then they also have wings,
Right.
So I'm trying to think of how the only way that we could end up with something with two pairs of walking limbs would be to go with this kind of setup, where we say that the gliding membrane, I don't know, that's kind of a stretch, but if we say that the gliding membrane is entirely supported by the ribs or gastralia or what have you, and that the front and the back legs remain sort of separate from them, and then somehow they gain the ability to flap these.
Yeah.
It feels like one of these options would be much, much more likely than this.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest. But again, it entirely depends on how much you care about hand waving.
So, I mean, I feel like what I really want, right? I mean, obviously there's like the look of dragons, right? Which I'm not married to, but I like the idea of being able to have versions that can move around in more distinct ways than in just like a bipedal creature, right? Like having there be versions of dragons that like be flightless or, become flightless and do fit into other niches like in a tree or scaling the side of a cliff or like, so I feel like I like the idea of them being more mobile in that fashion. So I feel like I'd want something that maintains the ability to move around like they had for legs when they're not flying. So I think either something like the pterosaur, or if you scroll back down a little bit, the that dude. I feel like that either of those two could still move around in a more like quadrupedal fashion or bipedal. Like, so I feel like as long as we have that movement, I can work with that. Like, I don't want something that's like pure like bird, chicken, emu type moving about on the ground.
Mm-hmm. So it's worthwhile bringing up at this point that, yeah, birds are kind of an interesting case because birds evolved from bipedal ancestors. When they evolved their wings, they were already walking around on 2 legs as opposed to 4. So flightless birds in our world, as a consequence, are also bipedal. Like, there are no birds that like also walk on their wings when they come down to land, unlike say bats, where all bats, when they come down to the ground, they still walk on all fours. They fold up their wings, and it would have been exactly the same with pterosaurs as well. In fact, we now know that a lot of the larger pterosaurs, things like Quetzalcoatlus, the really, really big ones that could get wingspans like in excess of like 10 meters, they were actually very effective ground predators that could actually move around surprisingly quickly and efficiently on the ground. And they would spend a lot of their time like stalking through the prairie, hunting small dinosaurs. So
that works then.
Yeah. And it ties in with this idea. I don't know very much about aerodynamics. Like, I'm not an aeronauticist, if that's even the right term. So when it comes to wing design, the annoying thing is it's very, very difficult to actually test it in any meaningful way. A lot of it does come down to just sort of going by feel. So I've completely forgot what I was about to say. What was the point we just brought up? We're talking about pterosaurs.
Being able to move around on the ground?
Yes. So that's what I was going to say. I'm not an aeronauticist, so I don't know exactly the details of this. But as I understand it, one of the reasons it's been suggested why the pterosaurs could get so big compared with birds, because there have been some very big birds in the past, things like Argentavis and Pelagornis and things that have...
Yes. I know a lot about Argentavis.
Oh, very good, yes. So there have been some big birds, but pterosaurs in general got much bigger. Just the size disparity in pterosaurs is much larger. And again, I don't know the specifics, but apparently one of the reasons that it's been suggested for that is that pterosaurs, because they walk on all fours, when they launch themselves into the air, they do what we call a quad launch, which is they push down with all the limbs at once, and that gives them a lot more power when they push off the ground.
Yeah.
So that is a way that we could justify, because we're going to get some big dragons, right? That's pretty much a given.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because one of the things I looked into was like trying to looking into some of the research on flying mounts from using real world things that have existed for one of the videos I did. And that fits in with why the Argentavis potentially could have carried humans, right? Both with the difference between being able to take off versus actually maintain flight, and I think it has something to do with condors are good at what's it with it where they're flying in one spot to be able to get all that takeoff too, and have the shape of the wing makes me think that because they have the long wingtips that allow them to get extra oomph too. So having that extra extent there in addition to being able to actually take off makes a lot of sense for that being good for being bigger and carrying weight potentially eventually.
Yeah. So we definitely want them to have the capacity for being quadrupeds.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which either the pterosaur option or the bat option, or to some
Mm-hmm.
extent the Scansoriopterygiid option
Yeah.
would also give us. And again, we can kind of mix and match different elements from these. We can say you can take any one of these and also say that there are these supplementary gastralia or some other element that's helping to
Mm-hmm.
prop up the wing membrane and give it shape.
Yeah.
So basically, whichever one you like.
I mean, I feel like I lean towards the pterosaurs. I mean, I feel like bats stayed pretty small.
True.
There's a reason for
They
that with the wing design, but
So there may well be. Again, this is I'm not an expert on this.
mm-hmm.
It could be just that just the right ecospace hasn't opened up yet. Birds still
Mm-hmm.
remain the dominant group of flyers these days. It could be that their just flight is just not as efficient. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I know bats do not have the same kind of respiratory system, the air sacs that birds and
Mm-hmm.
pterosaurs did, so that might limit them in some way. Um, but I mean, from what I could be wrong about this, but from what I've seen of the depictions of dragons in media these days, the bat wing seems to be favored. Like if you look at
Yeah.
the dragons in like Game of Thrones or in like Smaug in The Hobbit, they pretty much
Yeah.
always favor the bat wing design. So this
Yes.
could be an interesting point of like differentiation between your
Yeah.
dragons and the typical dragons, is to go with one of the other designs.
Right. And usually those aren't trying to use like, I mean, not that we couldn't combine it to have them have more than the thumb, but also commonly, well, not always, but commonly those dragons too like had separate arms, so they didn't need to be able to use the wing structure also to like um move around. Not that that limits us in any way, because like obviously bats do that, right? But
Hmm.
she's not like other dragons. I think I like the pterosaur vibe. I feel like that. I think I want to go in that direction to differentiate it, and also it just I don't know, picturing them like moving around. I feel like it looks better in my head.
Cool. So we still retain like um most of the digits, so that you can
Mm,
still like grab onto rock faces and like clamber about.
yes.
Cool. Um, so we'll go with the pterosaur one for now. How much
Okay.
time do we have? We've got like half an
30
hour
minutes.
left.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess um okay, so I think for probably the last thing that we'll discuss today, um we'll talk about weight saving adaptations now. So we know that the ancestral form of these dragons would have evolved a wing kind of like this from some
Mm,
gliding ancestor. And so it's quite interesting. Gliding in general has evolved dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times throughout the history of life on Earth. There's just gliding clades all over the place with things like, flying squirrels, flying phalangers, the Draco lizards. There's gliding tree snakes, you know, loads of gliding stuff. But most gliding clades are not very diverse. They just have like a handful of species.
mhm.
But the only three clades in the history of vertebrates to ever evolve powered flight, which, by the way, the fancy word for powered flight is it's called volancy,
Mm,
just because
okay.
everything has to have a fancy name. The only three volant clades of vertebrates ever, as soon as they evolved flight, they became ludicrously successful. So there are more species of birds today than there are species of, I think, any other class of vertebrate other than fish.
Mm,
Certainly more than mammals and reptiles.
yeah.
Um, the pterosaurs during their time were ridiculously diverse as well, and bats are the second most diverse group of mammals behind rodents. So flight
Oh,
is clearly extremely useful.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, And I guess I'll talk about this now while we're on the topic. So the main reason that flight is useful, number one, dispersal, which is going to be mega important on Pillow World. That's like
Hmm.
that's such an absolutely gigantic advantage. You are one of the only groups of mammals that's actually able to go and like seek out new resources on different islands. That's a game changer.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting the dragons to be similarly diverse to these groups. Tens of thousands of species.
Mm.
Um, and the other thing that flying is really, really useful for is escaping predators.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, flight is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Like I said, it requires a lot of adaptations. You need an extremely efficient respiratory system. You need to sacrifice a lot of other stuff that we're going to talk about in a second for it to work. And
Okay.
in most environments, if there are like most of the time, it's worth it just because flight does, as I say, enable you to escape predators and disperse so well. But if predation pressure is sufficiently low, if there just aren't very many predators around, or you just find yourself in a place where you don't really need to disperse, a lot of the time flight just isn't worth it. So
Mm.
even though flight has evolved only 4 times in the history of life on Earth, flightlessness has happened again dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Um,
Mm.
and the number one place where we find it, islands. It's just because some flying animal flies to an island where, as of yet, nothing lives there, and therefore they've got this little refuge for themselves, no predators,
Mm.
and so they think, this is great, and we'll just stay here, and flight is no longer worth it, and so they just lose it. So,
Mhm.
that being the case, again, I expect the same thing will happen with these dragons. I mean, we'll get dozens and dozens and dozens of different flightless clades of dragons,
Which is
and they
perfect.
could lose their flight in subtly different ways as well. So different groups of flightless dragons look different from each other. Um, so we could have, yeah, quite a diversity of flightless dragons as well, which we will get to in due course. But first, let's talk about some of the adaptations that we need to fly. So, as I say, one of the most important things, the big thing that being good at flying comes down to, is weight saving adaptations. You want to get rid of as much excess weight as you possibly can. And so, if we look at birds, for example, as I say, they've got these air sacs throughout their body that make them very light. They have these extremely large lungs and other air sacs, but they also have very light, hollow bones, and they've lost a lot of bones that are not essential for them. So
Mm.
this is one sort of sticking point that you may not be happy with. Um, in these 3 groups, one of the first things to go is the tail.
Mm.
All 3 of these groups lost their tail because the tail is basically just dead weight. Granted, some of the early pterosaurs did have very thin, slender tails with little veins at the end.
Mm.
Um, and I don't actually know how much that contributed to their flying or whether it was just a display structure. I don't know. But they lost it pretty quickly.
That's fine.
Birds, if you look at that's fine.
That's fine.
You're okay with tailless dragons?
Sure.
Ah, okay. Because I would have thought that was one of like the signature look of it. Most of the time when you see dragons, they have these very thick, sort of lizard-like or crocodile-like tails.
Yeah. No, I'm okay with them losing the tails. I mean, they could have like I don't know, those that end up like feathered or with like they could have things that give you that silhouette without it needing to be
Hmm.
a tail too if I really want it for some of them. Like they could have like there are plenty of birds that have like probably less intensely flying ones, but like, I feel like that's okay.
Yeah, we could give them the equivalent of like tail feathers,
Yeah.
or maybe in some groups there's some sort of structure at the back that's like a display structure. They have some sort of crest or something. Um, yeah, there are ways that we can give them a sort of tailed appearance without actually giving them tails.
Right.
Um,
Which is fine.
that's cool. Because yeah,
Mhm.
in birds, even though they do have tail feathers, the actual bones of the tail themselves have shrunk into this little section at the back called a pygostyle.
Mm.
Um, and bats, likewise, have pretty much no tail to speak of,
Mm.
even though most mammals, or at least a large number of mammals, and likely the ancestors of bats, would have had tails.
Mm.
Um, but that's not all. These at least in the pterosaurs and the birds, they both lost their teeth as well.
Oh, we
So
might need
both,
those.
yeah, I think that's kind of quintessential to dragons, I think.
Yeah. I can compromise on tails, but the teeth?
Yeah,
I
that's
could go with limited teeth though. Like if we wanted to go with like instead of having like a full like mouth of sharp teeth, I could compromise into having some like just like the front teeth or something. Like that could be a vibe or I don't know.
I might have to dwell on that because,
Okay.
yeah, in both the birds and the pterosaurs, they lost their teeth and replaced them with this characteristic beak. Um, so unless you want beaked dragons, um, there were some. There was a group of birds called the Enantiornithes, and they had both beaks and teeth. Um, I'm just messing around with the different options. Obviously, bats haven't lost their teeth.
Right.
I couldn't tell you why specifically that is. It could be that just they need teeth to feed on their typical food sources at this point.
Yeah.
Again, it could be that they just haven't had the opportunity to move into the niches that would require them to lose their teeth. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the dragons could retain their teeth at least to some extent.
Yeah.
I also worry at that point if we have something that has a pterosaur's wing, doesn't have a tail, and has a long beak, we've basically just reinvented pterosaurs. In which case, why are we even pretending that they're not pterosaurs? We could just say that they are pterosaurs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, while I'm at it, other weight-saving things that birds did in particular, they lost organs that weren't completely necessary. So birds don't
Hmm.
have bladders.
Hmm.
The only bird, I believe it's the only bird in the world that has a bladder, is the ostrich, which oddly enough doesn't fly.
Hmm.
Um, and also, most birds only have one ovary. I believe it's the left one, whereas the right
Huh.
one just sort of atrophies into nothingness. Because if you've got two of them, you can make do with one, so just get rid of the second one. As long as it saves on weight, get rid of it.
Huh.
So you see how it really does come down to make yourself as light as you possibly can.
Yeah.
That being said, again, I'm not an aeronauticist, so this goes into stuff that I still do not grasp properly.
Hmm.
But the pterosaurs, while they did go some way to make themselves as light as possible, they also seem to flaunt this in some cases, because I still do not understand how the Azhdarchids, which are the very, very large ones, things like Quetzalcoatlus, which is probably the largest species of pterosaur that we know of at this point,
Hmm.
they have ridiculously huge heads. Like if you look at the proportions, if I were to just sketch out one here, so we've got the wings. And then they've got a really long neck,
Hmm.
and they've got like a giant head.
Yeah.
The skull is like almost 3 meters long.
Hmm.
And it looks to me like the head is so cartoonishly large. I do not understand how they keep their heads up. So there's clearly some sort of black magic going on here that I don't understand. And on
Hmm.
top of this, there are also lots of other pterosaurs that have these ridiculously huge head crests as well. Things like the nyctosaurs, which are a group of pterosaurs that, if you look at their heads, they've got a beak here, and there's their neck, and then on their head, I've kind of drawn. I'm going to have to draw over this, but they've got this big sort of like antler thing.
Hmm.
It looks like that. And like this thing very clearly would have like added a lot of unnecessary weight and made it more difficult for them to fly. But one of the key things in speculative biology if you want to invoke a trait that seems really weird and doesn't actually seem to do anything, is sexual selection.
Yeah.
Just say that it just evolved that way because the females like it. So,
It's
like in these
hot.
pterosaurs, these really huge antler-like head crests only show up in adult males, whereas the females
Mm,
have much more reasonable crests.
mm,
That's not 100% across the board. There were some pterosaurs that were monomorphic. Both males and females had these ridiculous crests.
mm.
But that is to say, if you want the dragons to have some very pronounced, very weird trait that would seem to make it harder for them to fly, we could always fall back on sexual selection being like
Right.
a way of doing that.
Mm. Okay.
So,
Oh my gosh.
hmm,
There's been some funny stuff in the chat. One person did say, I don't know if this is relevant. Where was it? It was about bats. Someone suggested maybe bats haven't lost their teeth because mammals don't hatch out of eggs, and as beaks develop generally from just expansions of the egg's tooth, and as mammals they need to suckle milk, which is hard with a beak.
That is true. That is true. There's this idea that the reason why mammals have such fleshy lips compared to a lot of other vertebrates is specifically because of the need to suckle. That's true, Magpie. Invoking sexual selection when you're unsure isn't just a spec bio thing. Yeah, there are plenty of instances where when we don't understand the way a fossil works, it's probably sexual selection.
Yeah. So if we wanted to bring tails in, we could say tails were sexually selected for or something, but
yeah, we could say like there's a region of whether you wanted it to be some like a patch of scales or the tail itself or some feathers or some other kind of ornamentary structure that we just say lengthens or becomes more pronounced or something of that sort so that we have the suggestion of a tail. It could either be just a display structure or it could play some part in flight as well. It could sort of mimic the tail feathers of birds.
yeah.
Again, largely up to you.
Okay. I feel like we can think on that when we're getting into like individual ones, or maybe like different areas could have retained more or less of the tails potentially.
Sure.
Like some it could just be like a little stub, some could have more pronounced tails, some could just have feathers or something like.
Cool. So,
Are these mammals? Are they born in eggs?
oh,
Does it matter?
so they're definitely not mammals. In the
Right.
sense that they are not related to the lion that gave rise to mammals. But if the question is, can they give birth to live young? That
Right.
is a much more flexible question
Yeah.
because the Lagurpidids, unless I'm very much mistaken, we know that they would have been egg layers.
Mm.
But it's actually really surprisingly common for egg-laying animals to evolve to retain their eggs within their bodies until they hatch internally. So this has happened in a lot of fish do this, like sharks. A lot of sharks do this.
Mm.
A lot of lizards do this. Skinks do this. Snakes do this. Yeah, happens all the time. So if for whatever reason
Okay.
you did want these dragons to give birth to live young, could totally say that.
Okay. Would that be problematic for flying if you're just carrying around lots of extra weight anytime you have, I guess you're pregnant or something? Or I guess it's probably okay.
Possibly. It depends on the state of the young when they're born. So generally speaking, there's two different possibilities here. So the young could be not R, P. There we go. Precocial, which means that, like in a lot of mammals, the young, the moment they're born, are not necessarily independent of their parents, but they can get up, they can walk around, they can feed themselves if they need to. They might still have some degree of parental care, but like, a baby horse, for example, is pretty much good to go as soon as it's born, right?
Yeah.
Whereas alternatively, altricial young are young that are comparatively helpless. They haven't properly developed yet. And the interesting thing about this is a little bit of a tangent, but we've got time. So most birds have altricial young because when they're born, they can't fly. It takes usually at least some time for the babies to learn how to fly. And during the time that they can't fly, they're pretty much totally helpless. And so they need as much help growing as they can, which is why, relatively unusually, birds are typically monogamous and they have biparental care, which means that both the male and the female help out in looking after the young. Whereas mammals, about 95% of mammals are female-only parental care. So the male has no role in looking after his offspring. He just sort of leaves the female to do that, which is very nice of him. So if we apply the same logic to these dragons, if these young dragons, when they're born, are flightless, which I reckon they probably will be, then that means these dragons could also be monogamous as well. So maybe they, and if they, again, entirely up to you whether or not it's live birth, but if they do give birth to live young, then when the young are born, if they're altricial, which they probably will be, that means that they won't have had very much time to gestate, which means that they probably won't be very big, which means that they won't really pose that much of an issue for the mother. It won't encumber the mother too much if they're born like when they're still not very well developed.
Yeah. I feel like that tracks. I do like that.
Cool. So we're going with ovoviviparity, which is one of the worst words ever invented. Ovoviviparity is when the egg is retained within the mother until it hatches internally. And that's the name for it. And it's try saying that word in like rapid speech while you're recording a video.
Yeah, really. Yeah, and I feel like that works, and it potentially makes us more plausible with the still having teeth thing, more like bats maybe too.
True. So they are precocial. No, they're not. They're not precocial. They're altricial. They're ovoviviparous. What else can we say about them? Ovoviviparous.
Yeah.
Yeah, dreadful. In fact, fun fact while we're on the subject, so this word viviparous, vivi as in alive, and I don't actually know where the parity bit comes from, but that is the root that gives rise to the word viper, because vipers are ovoviviparous, and so they were like, oh, these snakes, they give birth to live young, so let's call them like the viviparous ones, and that became like viper.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, what else can we do in 12 minutes? We'll get to like skull shape and wing shape when we talk about the diversity of dragons. I think the last thing that we'll do for today, and we probably won't have time to discuss it in very much detail, but just one of the things we're thinking about at this stage. Been waiting for breathing fire. Okay, so first of all, do these dragons breathe fire in your mind? Would you like at least some of them to have the capacity to breathe fire?
I'm open to them being able to do something that feels strange like that. It doesn't necessarily need to be breathing fire. I'm also open to the idea of having, like, say there's like a strain of these that were like magicified by the same deities or whatever that created the pillars that then gave them the ability to breathe fire, and so we could just hand wave this very specific type can breathe fire because they're the whatever. Like, I'm okay with any of those directions. I'm also okay with like it doesn't need to be breathing fire, but I do like there's plenty of like different types of breath weapons that various dragons of lore have. So like I'm semi-flexible. It'd be cool if some of them did or something like that, but I'm not married to the idea.
Cool. So I think the most plausible way of handling this would be to say that dragons have a so that the earliest dragons to evolve, the ancestors of these dragons, we can just say that they had some kind of venom.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point in their evolution, it evolved into and I still don't actually know how to say this word because I've never actually heard it spoken out loud, but a toxungeon, which is basically just a ranged toxin. So if you think of like a spitting cobra, for example, instead of like biting something to deliver the venom, you spray it. So these dragons could have evolved some venom glands from like salivary glands in their mouth or something, which is pretty common. And then just like a spitting cobra, if they see some threat coming, they just spray this venom in at whatever it is that's threatening them.
Right.
And it could be sort of mythologized among humans in the same way that the cockatrice, if you read Pliny the Elder's book, The Natural History, he says that there's a monster in Ethiopia called the cockatrice, and depending on who you talk to, either looking at it, if it looks at you, it will kill you, or it has poisonous breath, that this like vaporous cloud comes out of its mouth and it'll turn you to stone or kill you. And one fairly likely proposed explanation of this is that he was describing a spitting cobra, because like the spitting cobra has this sort of spray that comes out of its mouth, and that could, just through oral tradition or mistranslation or misunderstanding, could have been interpreted as some sort of like poisonous breath. So a similar sort of thing could have happened with these dragons, where it's just like they're just spraying venom, but just like the humans have interpreted it as like, oh, this burning stuff comes out of their mouth, they must be like breathing fire. So that's a relatively safe explanation, I suppose. We could take it one step further and pull a bombardier beetle, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with bombardier beetles.
I feel like I've heard of them, but I'm struggling to remember.
So the bombardier beetle is quite famous because it's got this chemical weaponry where it has the ability to produce two different chemicals in special glands on its abdomen. And when it mixes these with a catalyst, it produces this really hot, burning, semi-explosive like spray. And so it's not simply just like a venom, it's actually like chemically reactive, I guess you could say. So that
cool.
would much more closely mimic the idea of like breathing fire. It would be like this sort of explosion that comes out of their mouth, you know?
I do like that.
Cool. And then if we want to go full fire breath, I think that probably would have to lean into the sort of magical explanation. In fact, idea just occurring to me now, just randomly. So we're saying that the surface is like totally uninhabitable?
Yeah, it's possible we could come up with some creatures that could survive there, but yeah, the idea is that it's like toxic. There's some sort of like poisonous fog or something that like people can't go down there.
Is the fog magical in nature?
It could be.
Because I'm just thinking that like these things have had more than 200 million years to adapt to this fog, and generally there wouldn't be enough nutrients down there, I would think, to support like a thriving ecosystem. But kind of
Mm,
like the situation with like the bottom of the ocean, like for a long time it was thought just, it's too dark and desolate for anything to be alive down there. And then we send subs down there and like, oh, there's like anglerfish and gulper eels and all these really weird stuff down there. So it
yeah.
could be that there's just a handful of species that have adapted to life below the layer of fog. Not that
Hmm.
the humans might not even necessarily know about them. Maybe they occasionally look down in the layer of fog and see these weird shapes moving around or something. Um, but, and this is kind of an out there idea, so feel free to dismiss it, but it's just something occurred to me in the moment. Maybe some dragons have in some way adapted to the presence of the fog, so they hunt in like the lower levels of the crags and the pillars, and perhaps for whatever magical reason the fog has like mutated them in some way, or fundamentally in order to adapt to the presence of the fog they've changed their physiology in some way, and as a byproduct of that they gain this ability, this sort of otherworldly ability to breathe fire. But that's going like full sci-fi magic, you know.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
really a sort of extreme end of the idea. So
Right. Yeah. Going with something like that, or something where they can like trap the gas in their body somehow and then like come above the gas or the fog and like spit it at
mm,
people or something.
yeah, there was it wasn't Discovery Channel, was it? I can't remember which channel it was, but several decades ago there was this mockumentary called Dragons: A Fantasy Made Real, and they had dragons that could breathe fire because they, if I remember correctly, they naturally produce hydrogen in their bodies,
Mm.
and they store it inside these special gas bladders, and they can, when they breathe it out, it somehow mixes with, somehow there's some chemical reaction that causes the hydrogen to combust. I don't know. That's kind of a stretch. But yeah, I think if we want a scientifically rigorous
Mm.
explanation, one of these two would be the way to go. Just have
Yeah.
it be just a generic toxin, or if we want to be a little bit more extravagant, we could have it be like a bombardier beetle spray.
Yeah. I do like the idea of going with the bombardier beetle route just because it's a little weird, and I do like that.
Cool.
Jake.
I keep forgetting this mouse doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, and if I decide
I
later I
pressed
want to
actually
like
yelled for it.
yeah. If I want to like have a thing that has been changed, like that's something I can add later if I want something affected by the fog, or
Sure.
something like that. Like that's kind of like a side thing once we have the core dragon
Yeah.
everything figured
Yeah.
out.
So like the bombardier beetle setup would be like the ancestral trait of like the original
Yeah,
dragons, and then there'll be plenty of opportunity for that to change. And like
yeah.
the one thing is that it would be a little bit difficult for an animal like a really big dragon. Like, why
Mm,
would an animal that large also need venom? Like, it's huge. It's
right.
like the biggest carnivorous animal around. Like, I don't think it would really have very much need of venom. Usually, we only see these sorts of weapons in fairly small animals.
Yeah.
So some of the larger ones could have weaker venom, or maybe that
Mm,
could
mm,
be somehow be involved in sexual selection as well. It could be like a display behavior or something. I don't know.
yeah.
Um,
I dig
but
it.
for now, we're just sort of sticking with the ancestral dragon. So
Yes.
cool.
I think that's good. And it is 1:58 and
Yeah.
30 seconds of how long
So
we've been live. So we've got a couple minutes left until the next stream, which is going to be on Red Quill's map making, which is going to be on like naming things in fantasy maps. They're a cartographer. So if you hang out here, this should automatically redirect to that stream. So it'll give you the little option to hop on over there. And then we'll be back talking about dragons more tomorrow evening, I believe.
yes, we'll be picking up where we left off and finishing some stuff up.
Yes.
Thank you
Yes.
very much, Richard.
Yeah. Yeah. This has been fun. I'm excited to go to bed.
Me too. It's 1 in the
I'll-
morning.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's way later for you. It's like almost 8 p.m. here, so it's really not that late for me. I'm just tired.
Oh, That was very good. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great.
Despite the
Okay.
technical difficulties, but that was
Huh.
probably my fault.
I mean, it's fine. Okay. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have fun with the next stream, and I'll see everyone tomorrow.
And me too. I will see you. Yes, I will see you tomorrow, Jake.
Yes. All right. I'm giving it. Okay. Okay, I'm clicking the end stream button now.